Hey everyone, Doc T here with another episode of the Horses Advocate podcast. Dr. Tucker is the formal name, Doc T. Everybody knows me like that. If you come to the Horse Advocate, we become a family of people interested in learning something about our horses. And I'm constantly going out and learning to bring the information that's out there to a level that makes sense to a lot of horse owners. It's not that we're stupid. No doubt we're pretty smart and we pretty much understand a lot of things, but we also are common sense people. We are also want to get rid of all the extra fluff in our life because we don't have time to do the thinking because we've got so many things we have to do, from our jobs that help us support our habit to just trying not to become overwhelmed with information. So that's my job here at the Horses Advocate, is to listen to the experts and try to come up with something that makes sense. And I just finished listening to a section at the AAP conference from 2021 on wound management. And I was really intrigued by it because, as one of the presenters said, you are always going to have a job with horses because horses always get wounds. And I thought that was so interesting because that's what I believe is one of the number one reasons why horse vets were invented. They were there to go out to the horse that's got himself in trouble and has cut the skin and needs to get the skin back together. So I want to give you a little bit of a background on wounds, and then I want to talk to you about what they said. Nothing's really changed, I've got to tell you. It was so comforting to listen to these experts talk about the latest and greatest and realize that with a very few changes, the concepts are still the same. So let's divide skin lesions into two groups. One is partial skin thickness. The other is full skin thickness. Now, this is something I talk about at the Horses Advocate. They didn't talk about it here because this is basics, but if your skin is only partially severed, so in other words, the surface is scraped off, what you and I would call a playground scrape, it's going to bleed because you're going to get into the blood vessels of the skin, but you're not going to be going through the skin, so the skin still has a barrier. It will still create a scab, and it will heal and finally go away. But that's nothing to worry about. You can put some antibiotic, topical ointments, whatever you want to do. It just doesn't matter. It's going to heal. The only thing I'd say is if it forms a scab, leave the scab. Scab is nature's Band-Aid. And if you want to bandage the horse correctly, let nature do it, okay? Because nature knows what it's doing. And if you start picking off scabs or you try to cleanse the wound, which prevents a scab formation, you'll never get proper healing. So if it's a partial skin thickness, the blood supply is there, the immune system will come in and take care of things. 99 times out of 100, these scrapes will heal by themselves. We also have to understand that with a scrape comes some bruising. And with the bruising, you'll get this swelling, this edema. So if you have the edema, you can put a pressure wrap on and push that edema back in and allow the underlying tissues to heal. But the most important thing is, as long as the skin is intact, you should not be getting a bacterial infection. Bacterial infections are the biggest problem with wounds. When you look at the skin, it obviously covers the whole body from, head to tail. It's covered in skin, and the skin has hair on it. The skin keeps all the bad guys out. And, in this day and age where we're all so concerned about one virus that we all seem to become experts in, this coronavirus, this SARS-CoV-2 that causes this disease, COVID-19, this is good, because if you're going to focus on that, you're going to be able to sleep at night, not knowing that the war that's constantly going on everywhere on this planet between you and the bacteria and the viruses and the fungi, all trying to gain entrance into your body. And the skin is your primary defense. everywhere around it, from, your eyebrows, down to your fingernails, down to your toenails, and the horse down its hoof, is all protecting that horse against bacteria. And if it's just a partial skin thickness, then fine. It's the bacteria and everything else are going to be kept out. But if it's not a partial, or what I call a full thickness skin lesion, which you could call laceration, a cut, if you will, then the two edges are pulled apart and you can see underneath the subcutaneous. The skin is called cutaneous, and the subcutaneous are all the tissues that are underneath the skin that have to bring nutrition and connect the skin to the body and provide innervation for feelings. There's just so much going on with sub-Q. We blow it off because we can say SQ or SUB-Q, and we all call it sub-Q, but it's the subcutaneous tissues that really does a lot of stuff. And once that skin is parted and it's a full cut or a full thickness skin laceration, there are a couple of rules or procedures that you need to know. Number one, if it's cut, it's infected. Just make that assumption. Obviously, if you scrub the skin clean and made it sterile and take a surgical knife and incise it perfectly so there's very little tissue damage and you're opening up the skin to go in underneath it, that's like the best scenario. But when it's your horse outside and it cuts itself on the fence, on the wire that you shouldn't have up, or another horse kicks it with a dirty hoof, you are introducing a ton of bacteria. So when I was asked to come out and take care of a laceration, my number one goal was to clean the wound. It's just, I won't call it an emergency, but you got about 3, at tops 4 hours, but I like the 3-hour rule. I wrote a blog on it, the 3-hour rule, which means that if you can get there before 3 hours, you have a good chance of cleaning out the bacteria and getting that wound clean again before you put it together. So clean, clean, clean. And you can use anything you want in cleaning a primary wound when it's just happened under 3 hours. Some people love betadine, which is an iodine base. Some people like chlorhexidine. It's going to hurt. It's going to be awful. When I had a serious accident with my hand way, way, way back when I was a child, they soaked my hand in water with betadine. And once the feeling started to come back, I was screaming in agony. It hurt so much, but it was important to get the bacteria out of the wound. And you can use physical abrasion with some cotton that's soaked in saline. You can add hydrogen peroxide if you want. You can take betadine if you want. It really is irrelevant when it's within the first 3 hours. Cleanliness is the goal. And the first subject that was covered was something called controlling wound bacteria and biofilm. And this is really interesting because I've never heard of biofilm. I'm sure it's been out there, but us older vets, we just know what we know. And what this whole concept was about was that a biofilm is an organized community of bacteria attached to the surface, enveloped in a 3D matrix, and allows bacteria to grow at a slow rate in a low oxygen environment and low nutrient environment. And that's exactly what I've been talking about. If you wait, 4, 5, 6 hours, if the cut happened last night and see it in the morning, you have what's called a biofilm, which I've always called just an infected wound. But the film is interesting because it's really persistent and enhances the growth of the bacteria. This is why when you get a cut on your finger, like a paper cut, let's say, and you see it now, and you're like, oh, well, no big deal. And then you wait until morning and you rush for work and you say, oh gosh, there's that cut on my finger. And there's just a little bit of redness around it, but it's not bothering you. And by the afternoon, it's really bothering you. You say, oh man, I got it infected. And washing it doesn't help. And, you put antibiotics on and a Band-Aid. And if you're lucky, it works. We have, this is disgusting. several pictures of infections on our hands that we decided to let go. We took pictures of it to show our students at the horsemanship dentistry school that if you don't pay attention to taking care of these cuts, you will get infection. And the most important thing is to wash your hands. So washing. It's been drilled into us through this COVID thing. Wash your hands because your hands are constantly dirty. They're in the dirt. I personally took over the chores of washing the dishes when I get home. Oh, you're going to say, oh, I'm such a good husband. But it was altruistic. I said, you know what? If I don't wash my hands thoroughly and for whatever reason, I will have cuts the next day. And ever since I started washing the dishes at night, it's made a huge difference in any of the minor cuts that I never see in my hands because I use them so much inside the dirty mouth of a horse. So she says that stage 1 is the cut and the introduction of bacteria. Stage 2 forms in 6 to 12 hours. 6 to 12 hours is when the biofilm. I'm telling you, it's 3 hours because if you go to 6 hours, you're behind the 8 ball and the biofilm has already started. So get in there by 3, maybe 4 hours. Just wash your hands. Go into a local service station and just go in and wash your hands. If you have a little cut, a paper cut, you accidentally cut yourself at the office or out of the barn, just wash your hands. And don't be afraid to wash them 2 or 3 times. I like to wash them until you get that sticky, squeaky clean. That way I'm killing all surface bacteria, the good bacteria that live on your body, as well as the bacteria that in the cut. Your surface bacteria will come back, but you're giving your body, your horse's body, a chance to clean up. And by the way, if you're as hairy as a horse, I'm sorry, but horses are hairy and you want to get all the hair off. So get your clippers out. And if you don't have clippers, get yourself a couple of disposable razors. You get a package of them at the local pharmacy or grocery store and keep them on hand and soap it up. And then just take your razor and just razor off all the hair that's around the edge. Just clean it up. Top, above the cut, below the cut, around the cut, both sides of the cut. Don't worry about getting the hair in. Don't worry about cutting what's underneath. Just keep shaving until you have a smooth, clean surface. And you will get nicks as you shave. It just goes with the territory. Don't worry about it because you're treating all wounds and they'll be included. Then get all the hair out. You can use cold water hosing you can put a little pressure to it. I like taking saline in a syringe with an 18 gauge needle. The 18 gauge is large enough that you can get a volume of water out of it, but it's small enough to create pressure. It's no different than you sticking your finger over the end of the hose, but this is more sterile. So you draw up some sterile saline and then you squirt it. And then you drop some more and you squirt it, drop some more and squirt it. This lavage with saline is so important to get that wound clean. I'll never forget the horse that tripped and fell on the gravel road. And I was asked to come out. I got there within 3 hours. I cleaned it all up. I scraped it. I shaved it. I scrubbed it. I made sure there wasn't a speck of dirt left in that very large wound that was it was on the forearm. Right between the elbow and the carpus is a big cut that the horse had just twisted the side, landed on it. And it's a gash about, I'd say 4 inches. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to do my math. 110 centimeters. There you go. For all you metric people out there. And when I was all done, I knew I was going to close this up in 2 layers, which is the number one way you close up wounds. It's called primary intention. That's what we call it. It means that we draw the skin edges together and let the body glue those pieces together. And to do that, we apply sutures. And the sutures go into the subcutaneous and draw it together to take some of the tension off the skin because you don't want any tension on the skin when you suture. And then you suture the edges of the skin together. So I dug my needle in to the sub-Q and I hit a rock. I'm telling you, it was a big chunk of stone that had worked its way up into between the muscle bellies that I had missed in my thorough scrubbing. And I had to dig in there with forceps and I got this rock out. It was about I don't know, half an inch in diameter, 13 millimeters in diameter. And I went in there and plucked it out. And I went back to square one and I scrubbed the whole thing again. It was like, if it was in there, it was going to create an infection. If I hadn't found that, this whole wound would have what we call dehisced or come apart, and a draining tract would have occurred, and it would have continued to drain had I not, and then I'd have to go in there and open the wound up and then find the foreign body. So cleanliness is important. You got to get all the dirt out, from macroscopic visible to microscopic invisible stuff. You have to get it all cleaned out. And then you can put in these sutures. And then depending on whether there's some trauma in there or not, you're going to find out that if there's trauma, there's tissue that's going to become digested and thrown out, and it's going to create a hole. So I always left a hole in a vertical wound. So if the wound went up and down, from top to bottom toward earth, I would leave a bottom of that open. And I would tell the client that wounds heal side to side, not end to end. It's one of those big things. So I don't care if the wound is an inch long or 10 inches long, which means like short to long, doesn't matter. They heal side to side. And if it's vertical, the bottom is going to be a drain. It's just going to be an automatic drain. You leave it open and you tell the people there's going to be some exudate. There's going to be a scab that forms. Leave it there. Just let the horse take care of it. In the meantime, my sutures would draw everything close together. Then if it's horizontal, so if the wound is horizontal, parallel to the earth, that's a little bit trickier. No wound is perfectly horizontal. There's always one that's a little bit closer to earth and away, and that's going to be your drain point. So you always leave something like that open. The worst kind of wounds are the V wounds. So if you have a V that is, it goes down and then up, so the point is facing toward the earth, those are beautiful because you can sew from the corners of the V all the way down to where it meets the bottom, and then leave that bottom flap open. And you'll, and I always told my clients that bottom flap, first of all, is only a partial skin thickness, as whatever the device, that piece of metal that cut them, starts to cut through at an angle. So there's going to be a thin edge that's partial skin thickness, and then it becomes thick, and it finally goes through the skin, and then it takes the skin off. And those bottom sections would always slough off. And as long as they knew that was happening, then they'd understand it wasn't a mistake. The worst one was a V where the point faces up, because now the blood vessel has to come down the leg, go around the wound edge, and go back up to the point. And those are always tough. So I would look at the longest side and I would suture that up. And then the shortest side, I would leave more open and put pressure on it. So everything got squished to the outside. And I would tell people that there's a good chance that this flap is going to lose its blood flow and we're going to lose that flap. But if we can at least get it clean and keep pressure on it, we can get some skin epithelializing. That's a big word. Epithelializing underneath that, and it'll slough off that inverted V flap and replace it with some fresh skin. The epithelium is that one cell thickness that comes from the edges of the wound and comes across the gap and seals that. So the word epithelial is a very important word to learn. And epithelialization is the motion, is the what do I want to call it? The process that the horse goes through to cover up the wound. And that will not happen unless, if there is a biofilm, not unless, but if there is a biofilm. So you want to get rid of that biofilm. It's mature at 2 to 4 days. So if you've got a wound that's 2 to 4 days old, you've got a nasty wound that needs to be really cleaned up, which I'll go into in a second. The author of this, the presenter of this biofilm, said that you need to take a deep tissue biopsy and swab and then debride. And I couldn't agree more. You take a bacterial swab, you can take a chunk of the wound out, the skin margin, the granulation tissue, which I'll tell you about in a second, and send that off for analysis, because you need to find out what the predominant bacteria is. You are normally going to get several bacteria back in the sample just because it's a dirty world out there. However, sometimes one of the bacteria is selected by your horse to kill, and the other one they're not capable of killing, so one could stand out. And that's the one that you want to go after with some topical antibiotics. I'm not a big fan of systemic antibiotics for one reason only. If you're afraid of a virus, you should be more afraid of antibiotic resistance. That is the scariest thing out there. I think about 5 or 6 years ago, the World Health Organization labeled antibiotic resistance as the number one threat to human health on the planet. And it still is up there. So we can worry about a virus that's spreading and getting us sick and killing some of our loved ones. But hold on, wait till you go in for a regular surgery, you get an infection, and then none of the antibiotics work and you die. That's probably going to be the scariest thing in your life. I know we went through it with our son. He got an antibiotic, or he got a bacterial infection that I just prayed every night the antibiotics were working against, and he pulled through. Thank goodness. Okay, so debridement is the key, and the takeaways of this talk was biofilms are usually in the chronic wounds. So if it's been more than 6 hours, you've got a biofilm. The longer it's been there, the more debridement you're going to have to do. You can't see a biofilm. That's the thing. And some of these biofilms are tucked away in what we call the nooks and crannies of the granulation tissues. And if it's not identified, it's going to lead to an ineffective or delayed healing of the wound and a lack of response to antibiotics. You have to debride, apply topical antibiotics, and use a surfactant type dressing. All right, so that was her talk. So let me talk about second intention healing, because that's what's going on. Primary intention, remember, is when you call your veterinarian, they come out, they clean the wound up, they clean it again and again, and then hopefully they use gloves or very, very well-washed fingers with close clipped fingernails, and they clean up the wound, and then they suture it together, and then you wait maybe 7 days, and you'll know at that point whether you have a problem or not. And by 14 days, you're taking the sutures out and everything looks good. I did an experiment on myself. I got cut very severely on the palm of my hand. And I know if you're just listening to this, you're not going to see, but here's the palm of my hand, and I'm going to point to it. Where is it? It's almost impossible to see. Okay, it starts there and it goes all the way over to here. So you're seeing on my hand a very thin, maybe 1.5 inches long, 45 centimeter, very thin scar on the palm of my hand. If I went to one of those palm readers, they'd say, I don't recognize that. What sign does that mean? What kind of life am I going to have? Because you can't tell it from the rest of them. And it was a dirty cut. And when it happened, I was in a horse's mouth. I was in the barn, and I just went over to the wash stall and I used copious amounts of water. Just let it flow. I took betadine scrub, which is the soap part, and I put it in there, and I just scrubbed and I scrubbed and I scrubbed. Yeah, it hurt, but I knew I had to do that. And then I put a Telfa pad on there, which is a nonstick dressing. And then I put a little bit of gauze, some 4x4s, it's too big for it. But anyway, folded them up, put them on there, and then wrapped it up with vet wrap. These are all the things that you should have in your horse barn. Nonstick pad, some 4x4s, and some stretchy, what I call vet wrap. In your country or wherever you're hearing this, it might be called something different. But it's a nonstick elastic bandage that you can put some pressure on. And I left the pressure on. And then Every day. No, it wasn't even every day. It was like every couple of days. You're going to think it's just gross, but I would take a shower, I would take it off. And boy, talk about it hurting, you know? But I decided I was going to let it heal by second intention, which means I let the body bring the edges together, create a granulation bed, which is tissue that allows epithelial cells to come across and to touch the other side, the opposite side, and come together. So by keeping it clean and putting pressure on it, I was able to make sure that that could occur. And if you guys watching this on video, I mean, you can't even see that cut. I'm trying to draw it. There's a lot of light here, but you can barely see. There's nothing. I mean, there it is. All right. So second intention wound healing is how we survived the millions, literally millions of years on this planet before someone invented a needle and thread to sew up wounds. So don't discount second intention healing. The problem is when it's dirty and it doesn't get cleaned, it doesn't work. And it will work the best it can, and it's going to leave you with this ugly mess. And yet you're still going to be able to eat and reproduce and, you know, survive, raise your youngsters. And it basically shuts things out. So the number one goal is to keep bacteria out. So it invades the space with this exudate and it fills in with granulation tissue, and horses are well known for the granulation tissue. It can become exuberant. I talk about this at the Horse's Advocate, where if it becomes larger or higher than the skin edges, then the skin edges are blocked. They can't come across, and it'll continue to become exuberant. I've seen them very huge beyond the level of the skin edges. So debridement is what we have to do. And one of the best debridements out there is called autolytic. It's so cool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has 6 different ways you can debride. Debride is a fancy word that just means clean up. I don't mean debride like after your party, you go into the room and you clean up all the dishes. I mean, debride means you take out the all the mold that's growing in your walls, and you take the walls off and you cut out all the dead wood and you replace everything. That's debridement, keeping the same structure when you're finished, but taking away all the rotted stuff. And that's what debridement basically is. The rule of thumb is to do as much and as often as needed and preserve as much of the good tissue as possible. So if you're taking down a mold infected wall, you take off all the sheetrock and all the lumber and any insulation that had mold on it, but you would leave as much of the rest there as possible, because if you took out all the 2x4 studs that were behind the wall, you know, you wouldn't have a wall left. So you want to leave all the good tissue there. Autolytic just is slow. It's selective. In other words, it only goes for the bad tissue. It leaves the good tissue alone. And it's relatively painless, which I think is really interesting. The biggest problem with letting this happen on its own is that it dries out. And if you live in a dry, arid climate, these things are going to dry. And once it dries out, then the edges really have a tough time coming back together. It becomes a dry piece of leather, which we don't want. So there are several dressings that he talks about that are called non-occlusive, and they let the exudate come out. And he said one of the best non-occlusive dressings you can use, which moves into the second type category of debridement called mechanical, is to use gauze. And it disrupts the normal cells. So don't use after the debridement. But if you need to get the thing debrided and you don't want to go in there and cut it with a sharp knife, and maybe the horse isn't the most perfect patient, you want to wet it with saline. And if you just keep the bandage wet, then you're going to allow the autolytic to occur. And as you take the gauze off, you're going to be taking off all the bad cells as well as some of the good cells. One of the really interesting things that he suggested was hypertonic saline, which is technically called 20% saline. And it turns out that they did the math and it was only 16%. But he basically took a half a cup, and this is a take home for you guys out there where you can't find a vet. You've got this old thing and you want to get rid of all this granulation tissue and crap and exudate that's in the wound. You take 1 quart of boiling water and you put a half cup of salt in it. And they finally said, make it a heaping cup of half salt. So a heaping half cup of salt and 1 quart of boiling water. And of course, let it cool down because boiling it will make it sterile and keep it sterile. And then soak your gauze in it and put that on. And after 24 to 48 hours, it's going to debride the wound. And that's what you want to do the first time. That's going to be the key. Putting in this hypertonic saline is going to work. Some people like honey, and I've heard honey, all my life, putting honey on. It's like 20% hypertonic. It's acidic. It's high viscosity. So, pardon me, that isn't high, but it's not high viscosity. In other words, when you put the honey on the wound, it will do a good job of making that wound look better. But as you're applying, it's going to drip down the leg, which is funny. So there is a type of honey that you can buy, medical grade honey, that doesn't allow it to drip down. It kind of keeps it plastered in there. I forgot to mention, this will work on any wound that's been left open and exposed and it's got infection. You want to get all this biofilm out of there. And one of the ways to do it is let nature take care of it. Or you can apply gauze with saline and honey, or Kerlix AMD. That's a brand name, Kerlix, Kerlix, and then the letters AMD. And it's antimicrobial gauze, and it kills the surface bacteria. It's excellent for the first debridement. Below the knee or the hock is a good rule of thumb. If you've got a wound at the knee or at the hock and below, you're going to have a good chance of getting exuberant granulation tissue. In other words, the epithelialization will not occur, and the granulation tissue will continue to grow beyond the edges of the wound and become what they call exuberant, what all horsemen call proud flesh. So you might want to keep that in mind. Above the knee and hock, like the forearm and the gaskin on up, they usually heal by second intention. Your primary purpose is to debride them and clean them up. And you might even be able to go in and suture some of those. But at the knee and the hock and below, it's a whole different ballgame in a horse. There's very little skin, extra skin to draw across the wound. The tension is high, meaning the skin is taut. And there's a lot of movement at the knee and the hock. And movement just really disrupts healing. The best thing, some of these have to actually be put in a cast so they stop the movement. So that's two of the types: autolytic, which means self-debriding. Mechanical means you use honey or gauze impregnated with saline, or better yet, 16 to 20% hypertonic saline, and that will help. The third they went over was enzymatic debridement. They said papain urea and collagenase, and I was surprised. I guess Granulex is what was my go-to. That was a trypsin, which basically broke down a lot of the connective tissue. And I call it Adolph's meat tenderizer in a can, but it actually broke down a lot of that stuff and really helped some of these things, especially in a horse that didn't want to stand or was very hard to treat. You just spray this stuff on, and it'll help debride it, and it would take weeks to months for some of these wounds to heal. But you could only use it on slight granulation tissue. When it became really exuberant, Granulex really wouldn't work. You'd have to do surgical or sharp debridement, which is our next category. I do this a lot. There's on the Horse Advocate site, you can see me taking off exuberant granulation tissue with a scalpel blade and getting down the level with the edge of the skin so it can come across. What I wasn't aware of was I was taking away some of the biofilm, which is where the bacteria hide out. They think that you should take away some of the skin edges, and I've done that before. If the skin edge doesn't look good, you'll take it away. Just to remind you, you can't see biofilm, so you can't really say, I've got it or not. You just basically debride, and leave as much good tissue as possible. It's a bloody mess. There's blood everywhere when you do this, but it has to be done. Some people do it via piecemeal. Some people do it with staged, meaning that they do a little bit at a time. Some of these cuts go right down to the bone, like the cannon bone, and you want to debride all the way down to the cannon bone. And he's actually scraped that off. So that's up to your veterinary surgeon. You don't want to be doing that because you don't want to hit a vital structure as you're making your incision and cutting out all this bacteria and thinking that you're a professional. That's when you lacerate a major artery, and then you got a major problem. So don't do that on your own. Keep with the simple stuff, which is the gauze, the honey if you want, or just cleanliness right away. That's going to help even the veterinarian that comes out later. If you've cleaned it really well, I don't think there's a vet on the planet who's going to get mad at you. You saved him a lot of time. You've done a really good job, and you've actually benefited the horse. The fifth type of debridement they went into was a biological, which I laughed at because that's using sterile maggots. And there's a company that actually produces these maggots from some sort of green fly. I didn't write it down. And they put the maggots in there, and it dissolves the fibrin. It has proteolytic enzymes, kills bacteria, inhibits biofilm formation. It upregulates healing genes, and it works within 7 days. So I think that's pretty cool. Sometimes you have to do a second treatment, but the exudate must be have a place to go. And then the last one that he talked about was something called negative pressure wound therapy, which I thought was a fantastic. Basically, they put a film over the wound and they glue the edges down. The horse has to be completely shaved in that area. And then they apply negative pressure and they suck everything out and goes into this jar. There's professional packs to do that. And then there's do-it-yourself stuff that the veterinarian can try. And that's really a cool way of doing it, especially if you have like the top of the horse has a huge laceration on the side. They got into a fence gate. I'll never forget the fence gate. This horse got in, the whole side of the horse was peeled up. It was, you can make a blanket out of what was peeled off. And luckily, the whole wound was facing toward the earth. So we're able to put a pressure wrap on and keep it on. We used a bed sheet to keep the flies off. And we got that thing to heal. And yes, there was a scar, but nature's just incredible how it can heal. And and that horse did actually really well. I was so pleased with that. But for some of these large wounds, whether it's on the leg or on the body, you can glue this material on it and put your negative pressure on. And next thing you know, you've got debridement, which allows the skin to heal. The next person talked about wound care dressings. And he obviously said that large wounds with too much lost tissue, you need to cover up. I think, skin grafting is what he's getting at. But if you aren't going to do skin grafting, you want to keep the wounds moist. If you keep the wound moist, you'll have epithelialization. I have to slow down to say that word. That is twice as rapid as if you keep it dry. And the faster you can get the epithelial cells to come across and heal that wound, the better off you are. So there's 4 phases, he says. One is necrotic. That's when you use hypertonic saline, the Curlix AMD, and the honey. So that's the initial stages, first 24 or 48 hours. If you have a dry wound, so it's a little bit beyond and there's dryness going there, you must moisten it. You want to use gel dressings, which we'll get into in a second. If you're in the granulation phase and the granulation tissue isn't working that well, in other words, instead of having exuberant granulation, you just have this ugly opening on your horse and it's not filling with granulation tissue. They said use calcium alginate or Curacol. Curasorb, Curasorb, which has calcium alginate in it. And that, for some reason, helps the granulation tissue come out. It's made out of calcium and an algae. And here's funny because they said in this presentation that if you go to Burger King and get their onion rings, have you ever asked why all the onion rings look the same size? And it's because they use calcium alginate and then put in onion particles in the calcium alginate. So that's what you're eating there. So now I've passed that on to you. No verification, I'm just believing the speaker. He seemed to know what he's talking about, so I'm passing it on to you. So then he further says that there's basically three types of bandages. One is non-occlusive. That's the kind that allows the exudate to come through, and that's really important, but it takes the moisture out. It actually helps dry the wound, and that you have to be careful with. You don't want to get it too dry. Then you have the semi-occlusive bandages, which basically maintains the moisture in and out. It's a lot more controlled. And then you have the occlusive bandage, which can actually add moisture because the exudate stays in. You must keep wounds moist. It allows the migration of the epithelial cells. I also want to add to that, which you didn't mention, but I've been saying for years, you also don't want to put any blockages to that. Some people put Vaseline in the wound at this point, and that will block, or any ointment, I should say, Vaseline-based ointment, some sort of antibiotic ointment. And these ointments can prevent the movement of the epithelial cells across the wound, which will promote the proud flesh. Also, do not, I repeat, do not use anything in the wound that will kill these epithelial cells. They are so delicate. Many of the things that people think are effective on these wounds are actually hurtful, such as scrubbing. Physical scrubbing will kill them. Any of the iodine-based shampoos, any of the chlorhexidine-based shampoos, hydrogen peroxide, alcohol, Clorox, anything you're putting on that wound that is not saline is going to hurt these epithelial cells. So in other words, only use saline or antibiotics that don't have a block like a Vaseline type base. There's tons of debridement dressing. There's wet gauze and the hypertonic saline. But the best thing you can do is cut out all the bacteria because that's going to help the best. Moisturizing jellies, dressings or hydrogels. There's a tube of it that you can get for filling in these defects in the wound. You know, they're caverns. Or you can, if it's just a surface wound, you can get a hydrogel pad that will touch on that. Great for fire or rope burns, and they can be left on for up to 5 days. So once you put it on, leave it on. You want to keep the moisture in there. You want to allow the process to occur underneath. Remember, if we're doing primary intention healing, we're cleaning the wound and then we're suturing the edges together, and bada bing, bada boom, you're done. If you're going to do second intention healing, which are wounds that have been there for a long time, or you can't find a veterinarian, it's been 6, 12 hours, 24 hours before you even find the wound. You don't want to do primary because you already have the biofilm. If you have the biofilm, the primary wound won't work unless you do surgical excision. If you get there where the surgeon can take out all the bad tissue and leave the good tissue, they have a choice of going on to primary wound. But if you can't get all the tissue out with the biofilm, you must debride it. And you do that with saline-soaked gauze, hypertonic saline, or whatever else you have. If you want to try the honey, you can do that. But now that you have a bed of granulation tissue, you want to cover that. And this is where the hydrogels come in. If it's covered, if it's a fire or rope burn or anything else, you can leave these things on for 5 days, keep the moisture in there, and then allow the process to occur. We all just want to jump in and fix things. And nature is very good at fixing these things. So let nature fix it by providing the best stage to perform on, and that's cleaning the wound up. I'm reading a little bit more of this talk about increasing granulation tissue. The calcium alginate, if you do use it, it's Curasorb by Kendall. Kendall is a company. It'll also promote periosteum to grow. So if you've got a cut that cuts down in the cannon bone and the periosteum, which is the covering of the bone, is affected, or on the face, you might want to try some calcium alginate. It will help get the periosteum to grow. Always use with saline for exposed bone. Never use hypertonic saline. That's really important. So if you're going to put calcium alginate on top of exposed bone, you want to keep it moist with regular physiologic saline, which is 0.9%. You never want to use anything stronger than that. You're supposed to leave this on for 3 days. Do not change it. And maximum 5 to 7 days, you want to leave it on. So when you take it off, you're going to be killing things. So you want that underbelly, the epithelialization and the granulation tissue to actually get on board and get to work. It takes a minimum of 3 days. Let's see what else. Epithelialization dressing. You keep on as long as possible to increase bacterial infection. Oh, this is really interesting. When you wrap a wound, you're actually increasing the temperature of that area because that just makes sense, right? You put gloves on, keep your hands warm. You're going to put a bandage on. It's going to increase the temperature, maybe by 1 degree. But what they found is if you increase the body temperature by 1 degree, you're actually going to increase epithelialization. I thought that was amazing that somebody actually thought about that. We get thinking about things in such a rut that when somebody comes in and says, the temperature might also go up and help. And they checked it out. Apparently it does. They have something called silicone dressing. It prevents exuberant granulation tissue. It can help with heel bulbs that are scarred, that are painful. You can put a silicone dressing on the bulbs of the heel, and that will actually soften them up. And that actually helps with the pain. That's about it for the dressings. It seems like I've kind of left everyone hanging. At least I feel I've left myself hanging, because how can you as a horse person do this when you don't have access to a lot of things? I always say use a Telfa pad, because Telfa pad prevents you from peeling off the epithelial cells. I cover that with 4x4s because that can put pressure, and then elastic bandage on top of that to put pressure. And then I top the band. I'm thinking that we're on a limb, somewhere below the knee or hock. You've got a cut, and you've cleaned it. You put some antibiotic powder on there, not ointments, but powder. You put the Telfa pad so you aren't going to peel anything off. You put the pressure that you fill in the gaps with some 4x4s on top of the Telfa and underneath the elastic. And then you seal the top and bottom of the elastic wrap that you put around the leg with something that sticks. It has a glue to the horse. So I put half on the horse and half on the bandage above and below. And then I turn the horse out for 3, 4, 5 days. This way the seal is done. Mud and dirt aren't going to get in the wound. The wound actually looks really clean when you cut the bandage off. I cut down the back of the leg where the cut isn't, and then I peel it down like a banana. I peel the top of the wound down with a hair, so it comes completely off. And you will be blown away that everything underneath that muddy leg is completely clean. So maybe next time you want to clean the leg before you take the bandage off, but it just doesn't get in. It keeps the moisture in. The wounds heal beautifully when you do this. And in 7 to 14 to 21 days, the cut is gone. It's just a minor scab. But that seems to work when you're out in the real world where you don't have a lot of things. You can get a Telfa pad, and you get gauze, you can get elastic bandages from your local pharmacy, or you can prepare yourself by getting them in advance and putting them in a first aid kit. So the last 10 minutes of this podcast, I want to get into skin grafting. I never did any skin grafting. I was scared to do it only because it's not that I was scared. It was just like, is it necessary? Do we actually need to do skin grafts? And I think the bottom line is, if you can get the wound clean and you're patient enough, all wounds heal. But a lot of times these things don't clean up. And the key to getting a good skin graft to work is to clean the wound. You have to completely get rid of the biofilm and make sure that you have a healthy bed. And sometimes these wounds are so large, like on the leg, they're so wide, the skin will never come together. So there is a place for skin grafting. And I believe that if your veterinarian has experience with doing skin grafts, that you should go ahead with it. There were several types of skin grafting that he went over. The biggest ones were the pinch and the punch. The pinch biopsy, the pinch is basically you tent up some skin and you cut it off, and then you take off the subcutaneous tissue, and then you plop it on this wound. The punch works better. You have to make a pocket in the granulation tissue to set these skin grafts in. The punch is better, where you take a skin biopsy punch, and with training and work, you can actually create on the healthy skin some punch biopsies, and then you prepare the skin bed with smaller holes with another biopsy punch, and then you plug them with your graft. And it takes 21, 30 days for a full take, and there's 60 to 75% is considered excellent. In other words, you're going to lose a quarter of the skin grafts that you put on there. They just don't take because they have to create a new blood supply. It's pretty crazy how they work. And yes, they look ugly, but not doing anything looks uglier. So keep that in mind. I've seen some skin grafts where the people didn't take into account the hair color. So you have sometimes some dark spots in a white background because the only spot they could find to get the donor was on the belly of the horse, where it's, pigmented. Some people don't align the hair follicles in the right direction, so you have hair shooting out in all different directions. That shouldn't happen if you're paying attention. Let's see, there's something else about these skin grafts. Anyway, they went over a couple of different other ones. They had a tunnel graft. They said, the presenter said he's never done it before. It looks possible. That's where you put underneath the skin the patch, which underneath the granulation tissue, put the patch. So you dig a tunnel through the granulation tissue and put the skin in there. And most people haven't done it. Some have done sheet grafts where any movement can affect it. But what's really nice about the sheet is you can stretch it by poking holes in it, turn it into a mesh, and then you can expand it. They've been able to do this without a dermatome, which is a special machine that can take the skin and make it very thin, and also can punch holes in it. But he's been able to do this without a dermatome. Then he talked about something called meek grafting, which is MEEK. The machine itself and getting yourself set up costs $50,000, so don't count on your local vet of having one. But he says it's amazing. It cuts the skin, the good skin. It punctures it, puts it on a stretchable plastic base. Then you can stretch that base in two directions. So you end up with 3 millimeter holes, which are just amazingly small. And what's important is there's a 93% acceptance in this. Now, this was developed in hospitals for burn patients where they've lost most of their skin. This works really well. So I don't think you're going to see this in horses. And the last type of grafting were called pedicle grafting, where you have a wound and you debride it and clean it all out, and then you kind of burrow in under some good skin, and then you draw that skin over. So you make a cut. So now you've got a flap of skin that you can move over on top of the wound, and you're making another wound. But then you can suture both of them together because there's less tension because you brought this pedicle of skin in there. It's not good for legs because there's just not enough skin. It's great for near the head. If you don't want to have the skin heal and draw an eye down, the eyelid will just get drawn down because of skin contracture. This helps prevent that. It's usually has to be done under anesthesia, but the reason it works so well is because the blood supply is maintained. You aren't cutting it off. and asking it to revitalize itself. So that's it for wounds. I hope I've covered a lot of them. I think most of you who have had a horse for more than a day has found that horses do get into trouble and get their wounds. The bottom line, or the thing you want to take away, is above all else, clean the wound. If it's fresh, don't worry about what you use to clean it. I'm not saying go out and get gasoline and light a fire. That's not what I'm saying. But if you want to use some antiseptics in there, that's fine. Even if the wound is several days old, the first time you use it, you know you're going to be destroying things, but that's what you want to do. You need to debride the tissue. You've got now some tools. Saline soaked gauze is a good way. Saline that's hypertonic that you can make and add it to the gauze. That will work even better. If you want to go the honey route, you can do that. Those things will help to get rid of the debris, hopefully get rid of the biofilm, and allow the horse to heal from inside out. Because at this point, you probably are not going to do any suturing. You can do grafting if you want, if you think that's important. But the biggest thing is to put pressure on the wound with a nice wrap. Keep the wrap on for days. Don't peak, because as soon as you start peaking, you're going to be introducing bacteria, and the biofilm still may be there if you haven't done a great job, and it's going to welcome this bacteria and it's never going to heal. If your wound is not healing, it is because it's infected. That's the thing that they're talking about. And the infection is the biofilm. And oftentimes, if you don't spend the time to do it right the first time, you're going to spend the time later doing it again and then again. So take your time, make sure it's all clean. Don't be surprised by hidden rocks underneath the tissues. Just make sure you've got it all cleaned out the best of your ability. Flush it out with saline, scrub, cut the edges out. Take your razor and clean out all the hair so it's not coming into the wound as it's healing, and keep it clean. And don't keep peeking every day. You do not need to change the bandage every day. Maybe the first 24 hours, take the bandage off and reset it. Make sure all that crap comes out. Sorry, that was a scientific term. The exudate that's being sloughed off, you want to get that. And at that point, only gentle saline irrigation under a syringe and a needle. Just gentle. Do not scrub it. Just don't. If you're using saline soaked gauze, when you take it off, it should preserve a little bit the epithelial cells and not destroy the granulation tissue too badly. But you want to get a smooth, nice red bed of granulation tissue. That's normal. What's happened is the skin is now sealed. Now bacteria are not going to get to the inside to infect the horse, but the bacteria are still on the surface trying to get in. And your job is to help push that out and allow the epithelial cells to come across and seal that thing up with real new skin. Yes, there'll be a scar, but that's just, it's better than dying. Having a scar is better than dying. And your horse is very good at doing it. If your horse is more than a day old and it's had more than one cut, you know the horse has all the abilities to fix things. It has the immune system. It has the platelets. It has the contractile fibers to draw the skin together. It can do the granulation tissue. It knows that mom and dad did it. It can do it. So trust the process. Just get the dirt out. And that's the biggest thing. Get the dirt, the biofilm out, and allow this horse to heal. That's it. Doc T, I've done everything I can to help you with wounds. I hope that helps you. Maybe you want to join, become a member of the Horse Advocate, and then come on over. Maybe there'll be rounds on it. Maybe there's an Ask Me Anything. You want to find out a little bit more about wounds, you can ask your questions there. I appreciate you finding the time to listen to me at the Horses Advocate podcast, and I greatly appreciate you being here. Thanks. Bye. Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There are two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.